So welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning. It's an absolute pleasure to have Funke with us because she is so well connected and so well respected, not just in Hertfordshire, but across the UK. And she's a very interesting character. I think you're going to very, very much enjoy what she's going to tell us about this morning. So I'm going to hand over without further ado. And everybody just sit back and enjoy, and please feel free to ask questions at the end.
Lovely, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen now, so the presentation should be coming up now. So that should be, can everyone see the screen? Just give me a thumbs up. Brilliant. So thank you very much, Breege, for this opportunity to speak to Chambers members during this very, very challenging time. My name's Funke Abimbola. I'm currently running my own small consultancy on a part-time basis. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. And today's webinar is called Fighting Fit, Coming Out of COVID-19 Ready for Battle. Now, a bit more about me. I'm a C-suite healthcare business executive with over 20 years professional experience. My first career is in law, so I spent about 12 years of my career advising both small and large businesses as a corporate lawyer. So I got to know and understand how business operates, you know, from business owners to owner-managed businesses to much larger organizations as well. I do live in Hertfordshire, and so many of the businesses I advised were in the Hertfordshire area. My second career is in strategic and operational leadership within the pharmaceutical industry, where I've been working for most of the last 10 years. I've worked for the largest biotech company, Roche. Most recently, I worked for a smaller global company based in Cambridge University. I'm currently an MBA student at Wharton Business School online, and which is why I'm running this board advisory consultancy, because I want to be able to be of service during this period of time and actually really, you know, support businesses through the COVID crisis. I do lots of commentating for the BBC when COVID-19 isn't happening. So every 3 months or so, I do the news review of the BBC. I do lots of diversity work as well. The most interesting thing about me, by far the most important, is I'm a very proud mother to this young man. I'm sitting upstairs in my bedroom at the moment. I'm hoping he doesn't make too much noise when he goes downstairs, I must say. I've told him to be very, very quiet. He is aware I'm on this live webinar, but he's an aspiring software engineer. I'm very, very proud of him. Now, why is this a battle? Why have I said, you know, we need to be battle ready? I picked up on something Boris Johnson said probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, where he described our situation like this. I thought this was really, really spot on. He said, this is a fight we never picked against an enemy we still don't entirely understand. And I think that still sums up where we are now. We don't entirely understand the virus, what's going to happen, the data. You know, we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. Things are constantly changing. Until the 10th of May, it was stay home, protect the NHS and save lives. Now we're being told to stay alert, control the virus, but to still save lives. What does that mean? There's so much information out there at the moment. And we now have this to think about as well, the COVID alert levels. And apparently we're at level 4 with a view to moving down to level 3. So we're being constantly bombarded with information. Things are very, very, very uncertain still. But I want to give you all some reassurance about this situation. Uncertainty is the new normal, but readiness can be taught. And that's what I'm going to help you with throughout this webinar. So what am I going to cover today? I'll start with something called sharpening the saw, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. Then I'll move on to human capital, your business as a brand, operational management, and financial management. The first thing I want to talk about is sharpening the saw. What does that mean? This is all about self-care. The phrase sharpening the saw actually comes from one of my favorite books. If you've not read this book, I highly recommend that you do get a copy on Amazon. You know, it's freely available at a very little cost these days. But Stephen Covey wrote this book a long time ago, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I find time and time again, I go back to this book time and again, whatever situation I'm with my business life and my work life, because he sets out 7 habits that if you follow them, you somehow manage to maintain some level of balance, both at work and at home. Now, self-care throughout all of this is really, really key. I've never seen colleagues, friends, you know, associates, members of my network, more stress. This is the most stressed I've seen people, far worse than previous recessions, because we've all been impacted by what's happening at the moment. And I've got some practical tips around self-care, because I can't talk about recovering from all of this without making sure that we're in the right mindset for recovery. So you can start doing these things now. Focus on what you can control. So a lot of this is outside our control, and try and set aside the things you can't control, because we can't control them anyway. What I do, because I am a worrier, is I actually allocate my time to worry every day. I allow myself up to 30 minutes a day to worry. So I write down things throughout the day. This is what I want to worry about today. This is what's on my mind. I won't worry about that now. I'll worry about it later on. And I just crack on with the things I can actually control. I found that now we're in week 8 of lockdown, that's actually become a bit of a habit. And I'm learning actually not to worry about the things I can't control. So this is one of the things that you might want to think about, actually allocating time to worry, because otherwise you'll be worrying constantly throughout the day about the things you can't control. Information hygiene is key. I spent the first 4 weeks of lockdown obsessed with data, reading all the newspapers, looking at the curve. Is it flattening? Is it going up? Is it going down? What's happening in the care homes? And actually it didn't help my mental health at all. So now I check in with the news once a day and that's it. I don't even really discuss it with people anymore. It is what it is. I know the latest. I'm cracking on. I'm focusing on what I can control. Screen fatigue is real. It's funny, we were just talking about this, Breege, weren't we? That, you know, spending so much time focusing on a screen, whether that's your computer or handheld device, is exhausting. It takes added concentration to be able to read body language on a video call, for example. So try and break that up. Don't try and avoid having lots and lots of Zoom calls back to back. You know, break it up a bit, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, walk around for a bit, and then you can be ready for the next Zoom call. Get out of the house or the flat at least once a day. Now, again, this can be hard when you've got lots of meetings. You don't have to go out with members of your family, by the way. Sometimes you might actually want to have a bit of a breather from them, frankly, because, you know, you've all been in the house at the same time. You don't all have to go out together. But getting physically out of the house really, really does help with cabin fever. Again, that's something I didn't do terribly well at the beginning. I was so focused on working hard. Exercising regularly, sensible eating is really, really key. It affects energy levels and how you feel and how positive you are or not. Having quiet time at some point in the day just to reflect on how things are going generally. Remember, it's good to talk, you know, don't keep it in. If you do need to talk about your concerns, please do. Maintain some type of routine as well. Again, I struggled with this initially, but now, you know, I'm trying to get into a routine to make sure that there's some semblance of structure to the day. The whole point around this is the right mindset is absolutely fundamental to recovery. So it's really important that you think about all of these things. Before I move on to the next sections around human capital, operational management, and so on, I want you to bear in mind 3 important questions as we're looking at some of the practical things that we can do to recover. Why are we doing this? What are we doing? And how are we going to do it? So constantly start with why. You know, really question and challenge yourselves. Why am I doing this at all? If that's compelling enough, then think about what you're going to do and how you're going to go about doing it. Human capital, what does this mean? This is all about our staff. Now, we've had so much guidance in the last 24 hours. I've been trying to read up on all the government guidance in readiness for this webinar. It's very difficult to sum it all up because different workplaces have different considerations. We're going to have risk assessments before staff go back to work. We encourage to now have face masks or face coverings in certain situations. Social distancing needs to be maintained also. So there's a lot there. And what I'd encourage you to do is at some point, have a look at the summaries for each of the different workplaces, because I couldn't possibly go into all of it now on this webinar. But prioritizing staff is really, really important, and the government keeps hammering home about that. We keep hearing about being COVID secure. You know, the last few weeks, suddenly that's the phrase that everyone seems to be talking about. Looking at things like a phased return to the workplace will be important. And I believe personally that if you can still keep your staff remote working for as long as possible, that is by far the best way forward at this point in time. Addressing your values as a company, your own personal values. What's your mission as a business? What's your vision as a business in light of everything that's happened? Start thinking now about what that will look like once we try and maintain some kind of semblance of business as usual. Motivation and incentives for staff may have to be looked at as well. Succession and recruitment, you know, things like this don't go away. In fact, it becomes even more important to address these issues going forward. Have a look at your business structure. You know, how are you structured? How have you designed your business? Who's on your leadership team? Who are your managers? Who's in a leadership position? Because during this whole crisis, you'd have seen some people really up their game. You'll think, wow, you know, that's someone really, really talented. And then there might be others who are actually struggling a bit and might have some development needs. So reassess where people are at. Think very carefully about internal communication. You know, staff do like to be kept informed. Even if you don't know what to tell them that at this point in time, you don't have much of an update, but usual support functions are there to help, or you're there to listen, or whatever it might be. They need to hear from you as a business owner. Leadership development is also important, as is learning and development. Now, one of the best tools that I can think of as a starting point for learning and development is something called Myers-Briggs. So I'm very, very practical about this. And this Myers-Briggs type indicator was started with a mother and daughter team some time ago now, but it basically identifies through a questionnaire, and it's widely available online, it's available for free. There are 16 personality types with preferred or default styles. Now, the reason why this is so important in the workplace is that improving self-awareness and understanding of what our preferred styles are is really, really important for strengthening teams and businesses. I've seen time and again when I've run these workshops, teams coming together in a way that they never have before. It's driven productivity. It's improved motivation and engagement because, you know, people understand for the first time why they behave the way they do in certain situations. You get a report when you do the questionnaire, read it through, and it's about 90% accurate. This is something I can definitely help you with if you're interested in looking at this for your staff in the future. So I want to talk about your business as a brand. Let's not forget that we're all going to have a story to tell once this is over. Once we're back, you know, in the regular flow of things with work, what is your story going to be? This is all about external communication. You know, a number of companies and businesses now are already thinking about what their corporate narrative will be post-COVID-19. So start thinking about that now. You know, start thinking about how you can use this to refresh your brand as a business. You know, this is a great opportunity to come out and say something new, to look at customers and employees and the company itself and investors, all of whom are affected by your brand. They're very much affected by what you say about your business. So make sure your brand is memorable. It's something that will stick in people's minds, that it's meaningful, that you really feel passionately about it. It needs to be appealing visually. So, you know, play around with things like color and, you know, how the fonts appear with the name of your company, your business. All these things really, really matter. A number of companies and businesses are looking at refreshing their branding right now because they want to relaunch. It's almost like they need a clean break once things start again. So psychologically, they're looking at that. The brand needs to be protectable. So don't forget, you know, with my lawyer hat on, don't forget about trademarks and things like that, because the last thing you want is for someone to actually steal your colors and the fonts and the letters you come up with. It needs to be adaptable if you're providing different products and services. So where you have many, many different products and services that you might be providing, think about how that brand could be used in all of those scenarios. And it also needs to be transferable as well. And this applies to if you're a sole trader to a much larger business. The branding is really, really key. And what I implore you to do is really take advantage of the fact that we are in this situation to change your story. Your story as a company, as a business, can change as a result of this. Don't forget about marketing as well. So, You know, there are a number of core principles around marketing, looking at customer value, differentiating yourself, segmenting the market, you know, targeting it and positioning it. Again, after this whole crisis has settled down a bit, you'll need to address all of those things. Who are your customers? You can't be all things to all people. Focus on the right customers for strategic advantage. There's some very, very clear areas that are growing right now. Healthcare is a massive growth area at every point in the supply chain within healthcare. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of, you know, need for really good service and products. Technology is a huge growth area in the middle of all of this as well. And anyone involved in logistics and supply chain is going through a massive boom phase. So, you know, bear these industries in mind, the growth industries, as potential clients and customers when we're looking to recover, and build your loyalty with those selected customers. Operational management. This is all about reviewing all aspects of your day-to-day operations, everything from the moment someone makes a phone call to your company, the receptionist picks up the phone, what are they saying? How are they saying it? How are they directing the call? How do you win customers? How often do you meet with your staff? You know, everything is really, really important, because you need to look, in light of COVID, which has disrupted so much of what we used to do, you need to look very carefully at what works well, what doesn't, and how you can improve. I'm not talking about reinventing the wheel. I'm really talking about embedding a continuous improvement mindset. And there's a really effective tool that we can use for this called Lean Six Sigma. And I'm going to talk you through a very simple illustration of this, because Lean Six Sigma is a very complex tool which, you know, can become really complicated for very large companies, but it's also very, very simple. And I'll break this down for you as simply as I can within the time frame I have for this webinar. What is Lean Six Sigma? It started off with Six Sigma with Motorola, and then Toyota came up with Lean. And since the 2000s, we've had Lean Six Sigma, which is a combination of the two. Now, the key thing to remember about Lean is that everything we do is part of a process. When we're talking about operational management, if you think about it, everything we do is part of a process. Driving to work, you know, waking up in the morning and deciding what time you're going to get up and what order you do things before you even go into the office. You get into the office, you know, how do you go about setting up your day? How do you go about getting new clients? And all of these things are part of a process. And because of that, all processes can be improved. And that's what I'm really getting at here. With things like Lean Six Sigma, when I've practiced this and I've, you know, led teams to improve, it's led to collaborative team effort, which we all will need once we come out of this, believe me, improving performance. It systematically removes waste, so you'll find that you waste a lot less time on tasks and you're a lot more effective in what you're doing. It reduces variation in the process. Now, when things are too varied, again, that can lead to wasted time, and it overall will optimize operational management. So that's the theory behind it. I'm going to talk you through a bit of the practice to give you an example of what I'm talking about. And I'll start by using one of the simplest starting points around the process review, which is an acronym called DMAIC. It stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and then Control. And the example I'm going to start with to sort of talk you through a process map, because you need to be able to sort of map out what the process is and what the separate tasks is what's the process for posting on LinkedIn. So if you're going to put up a post on LinkedIn, I'm going to break down for you what the steps would be. And those steps will translate to anything else you might be doing in your place of work day to day. So this is a process mapping phase. So first of all, you need to find a topic. So if you want to post something on LinkedIn, you need to decide what you're going to actually talk about. Then you need to do the research. Very important to do that, of course, to sound credible. Then you create an outline post. Then you actually write the post, proofread the content, then you publish the post. Very straightforward. If you missed any one of the steps between find a topic and publish the post, you can begin to see how that would compromise the post at the end. If, for example, you went from finding a topic to creating a post outline without doing the research, there'd be a lot of time wasted at the end, because you'd actually start doing the research at the end once you've actually written the post. So it's actually important to do this in the right stages. And it's a very simple example, but this is the sort of thing that can be translated to anything you're doing in the workplace. Absolutely anything. It can be as simple as this. It can be even more complicated, but this kind of mapping really highlights where you might have challenging areas to address in how you operate on a day-to-day basis. I'm a firm believer in improving what you do currently rather than reinventing the wheel. So again, if you want to find out more about Lean and how this can work for your business, do reach out to me and I'd be very, very happy to help. But I hope this simple example gives you an idea and a flavor of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Financial management, massive, massive area. There's a whole load of information available on the British Chambers of Commerce website around what the government has offered in terms of funding. They're constantly updating this because, you know, for example, I heard this morning that the furlough scheme is almost certainly going to be extended and then also amended in some way to make sure that employers are contributing more potentially. So it's a constantly moving feast. I can't go into the belts and braces, and I'm by no means an expert on all the things that are available, but there's a very, very comprehensive hub that you can go to as a resource, and I would implore you to make really good use of that if you haven't already. And I'll give you all the resources, by the way, at the end of my presentation. But there's still some essential tips I have around financial management. Cash is king. We're hearing that more and more these days, but in the current situation, it's never been more important. As businesses, we need to really identify our finance needs, and forecasting and cash flow are absolutely key for this. Constantly review your fixed costs and variable costs when we're recovering. Start doing that now. You know, there are things that you might not even know you signed up for as a business that should have expired. You know, I've heard some really interesting stories about licenses that aren't being used for software, etc. So there is something that you should be able to cut out and actually trim down and be a lot leaner as an operation without compromising your business and what you're doing on a day-to-day. I wanted to flag up a really good resource, an independent public body called the Small Business Commissioner. I don't know how many people are aware of this resource, but this is a public body that's been set up by the government, tackles late payment and unfavourable payment practices in the private sector, and it's UK-wide coverage. And they will actually, on your behalf, chase up a bad debt. If you get to the point where someone's not paid you and they're giving you excuses and fobbing you off, contact the Small Business Commissioner and they will take up the fight on your behalf. It's an essential resource for small to medium-sized businesses. So please, 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 if you're finding that a supplier owes you money or a customer, whoever it might be, and sometimes with a customer you might feel a bit embarrassed to actually be too bullish with them, let the Small Business Commissioner be the bad guy in this scenario, and you will get your money. They have a way of writing very effective letters and threatening all sorts of things on your behalf, so you'll get your money back that way. The key to financial management going forward will be planning, planning, planning. So we can start and continue doing that now. So once we're in that recovery phase, we're in really, really good shape as business owners. So remember again, 3 important questions. Why are we doing this? What are we going to do? And how are we going to go about doing it? There are lots and lots of resources that you can go to follow up on anything that I've talked about. There's a link to Stephen Covey's website, a link to the free Myers-Briggs test if you're intrigued to find out what your Myers-Briggs profile might be, and you'll probably have a good laugh reading the report. Lean Six Sigma, there's a link there to find out a bit more about Lean Six Sigma. I've put a link there to the British Chamber of Commerce Coronavirus Hub, essential resource for businesses at the current time. There's a link to the Small Business Commissioner also. There's lots of government guidance now on working safely during COVID-19, and I referenced that earlier. So there's a comprehensive link to the constantly being updated guidance there. And there's also a really, really good resource. I'm partnering with a firm called Boyden, leadership consulting, because you might find that, frankly, as a business owner, you could do with some individual support as a leader. You might feel that this has all been, you know, really, really disrupted you, and you really need that one-on-one coaching. And there's an excellent guy at Boyden called Andy Wolf, who is really good at understanding owner-managed business owners and their struggles. In fact, business owners and senior execs at all levels. He also lives locally. He lives in Markyate, so you know he's physically in the county, which also helps as well. And very adaptable in the way that he'll be able to coach you through all this. So I think that that might be helpful for some. So I just leave that there as an additional resource. If you want to keep in touch with me, there are all my contact details. And I've allowed plenty of time for questions because I'm aware that I've given you a lot of information. Some of it will be new, so some of you may not be familiar, for example, with Myers-Briggs or Lean Six Sigma and how that works, or there might be other things that you feel that you'd like to ask me about. So I'd be very, very happy to take your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Funke. That's absolutely spot on of what we all should be doing. And I'm going to put it out to all of you. If you have a question, please raise your hand. There's quite a lot covered in the webinar. There might be something that you want to focus on, and maybe going back to the very beginning of what we were actually, you know, what we were actually talking about there, of actually being in the right mindset. Has anyone got any comments about being in the right mindset? Because it is a difficult one to actually do when you don't know what the future holds. Nobody's going to ask a question. Come on, don't be shy.
Don't be shy, come on. There we are. Leslie. Yes.
Oh,
hello.
sorry. Can I ask?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, you go first. Sorry.
So thank you for that, Funke. That was an excellent presentation. I wanted to ask a question in relation to the continuous improvement mindset.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, how would you suggest would be the best way to get honest feedback from staff members? Or what are some of the examples of good ways you would suggest?
Yes. So this is where it's important to have aligned on the values before you ask for feedback, actually, because from experience, I found that if your values aren't aligned as a sort of group of people at work, feedback can be used as sort of manipulative tool if you're not too careful. And it's also good to be able to hang feedback off corporate values. So, you know, can you give me examples of where, say, if one of your corporate values was courage, having feedback linked to that. You know, I demonstrated courage by, you know, having some kind of framework is really, really key for feedback. So I think you do need to start with the values that you hold dear as a company and get to some kind of agreement on that. Make sure everyone's on the right page, and there's ways you can do that together as a group, as a team, and then make sure the feedback is you know, sort of hangs off that. And I just stick to, you know, what do you want me to stop doing? What do you want me to start doing? What do you want me to continue doing? Start, stop, continue. Just keep it really, really simple. And that gives a simple framework, and it covers both the areas that need to improve and what you're doing well. Because again, with feedback, often we go straight to the areas that need improving without actually giving the individual the you know, benefit of what they're doing well, which is really demoralizing, you know, when you think about it. I'm sure that, you know, most of us have probably experienced that in one way, shape or form. So have a values-driven feedback process and stick to something as simple as start, stop, continue. And I think you can't go too far wrong with that. So does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thanks very much.
Hi, Sue. I think you had a question. Sue Bezic. You're on mute, Sue.
There we go.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Sue. Go ahead.
Right. It was more an observation. I mean, I have felt, particularly with the weather, as though I've just had a long holiday. I'm getting regular money coming in. I've looked at my bank statement again today, which I do on a daily basis, and I have had the job extension scheme money paid in. I received my small business grant yesterday.
Wonderful.
It's sort of lulling you into a false sense of security.
Yes.
But I do have a cash flow, and I am looking ahead as to when it actually all dries up. My problem is that I'm not, once I get to work again, I'm not going to get any income in for at least 6 weeks after that, because of the nature that we do. And that is the problem of trying to get over to employees. Just, it's going to be 6 weeks of hard work. There's no guarantee at the end of it where we're going to get to, and that's the bit I'm going to struggle with. I'm not sure really what to do.
So again, this is where, when I talked about internal communication, that is key. It's hard. It is difficult, because this is a message you don't want to be giving, right? I mean, that's the whole point. Who wants to be telling their staff this message? But you have a choice there. You either tell them or you don't. It's still going to happen. So the scenario you've just explained to me, you know for a fact is going to happen. If you don't tell your staff, some of whom will probably suspect, because they're familiar with the business, that will raise real issues about trust, with you as a business. I assume you own the business, do you, Sue? Yeah. So that raises some real issues with trust, because if you're not telling them what they already know, and, that leads to a whole can of worms that you really could do with avoiding. So be vulnerable as a business owner with them, and just be, lay your cards on the table and say, be very, very honest about the support you've had so far, because that's a good news story. I know businesses that have struggled to get even that. So that's positive. And say, but given the current climate, this is what it will mean for us. Yeah. What I would really love is if we together, do you see the sort of language I'm talking about? It's that collaborative team effort. And they'll want to be a part of it. 6 weeks is not such a long period of time either, that they're thinking, it's not 6 months, right? So 6 weeks actually is probably manageable for most people in their minds. I mean, we've been in lockdown now for almost 8 weeks. Let's not forget. But transparency is key, and I have every confidence that you'll find the right words, Sue. But do talk to them. Don't not say anything. Because,
no. It was definitely that is on the books to me.
Yeah.
Speaking.
And be vulnerable. We all are right now. We've all been brought to our knees by this situation, and there's no shame in that. They'll respect you all the more for it. Trust me.
Okay, thank you.
So I hope that helps.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Leslie's got her hand up.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, thank you ever so much. That was really interesting. I think your first question about mindset, I'm finding at the minute we're all very task focused. What are the things we've got to solve today? And you've really got to concentrate to put that time in to make sure people are all right. So I'm trying to have sort of separate, here's the task, and then another conversation about how people are.
Sure.
One of the things I was wondering, if there's any resources or guidance around how to run sort of collaborative discussions using Zoom. We've got lots of thinking about future direction, and we've done Myers-Briggs a couple of years ago with my management team, and we have people who say what they think, and others who need to go away and think about it. We've got the extreme.
Sure.
Have you seen, is there any good guidance around how to do this and get the best out of these collaborative discussions?
Absolutely. So there's a myriad of articles on LinkedIn now about Zoom and indeed video calls in general, and how we can maximize them for things like quizzes for teams and Zoom drinks, and there's all sorts of things you can do with Zoom outside of the business itself. So I'd have a really good look on LinkedIn, because every day it seems someone's writing something else about how we have to pivot. I don't know if you've heard that word being overused recently. There's loads on LinkedIn, and it will be fresh opinion that you can tap into, that people have already experimented with, during lockdown. So that's by far the best advice I can give you on that, Leslie. I hope that helps. Give me a thumbs up if it does. Brilliant. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Anybody else? I have a question, actually. We're actually now, we're coming out of lockdown to some degree or another. But what we've all been fed over the last 8 weeks, we hear such horrible stories about, not enough ventilators, not enough PPE. How do you actually manage that fear that you're actually going to come out of the safety of your cocoon, your home, and actually be part of the wider world?
That's a really, really good point. And this is where information hygiene is so important. Because of course, we only hear the scare stories. The headlines are about fatalities, deaths, which only happens to a very small percentage, by the way, of people. You know, if we were to actually test the whole of the UK, we would find probably millions have had COVID-19 in some way, shape or form. And the real death rate comes down substantially when you look at that. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. The second thing is there now seems to be more of an emphasis on reporting recovery rates. I noticed yesterday that because, you know, we've had enough of the headlines about the youngest patient in the UK dying, you know, horror stories. It's a really small number of patients who need to be ventilated. I know this because I come from a family of doctors, so unfortunately are very much in the front line, you know, seeing all sorts of things. But even they will say that the vast majority of patients, even when they come into hospital, are fine with oxygen. You know, the ventilated patients are the tiny percentage. But that's what we hear about, of course, because, you know, we're looking at flattening the curve. So to do that, you know, the government can't look at recovery rates, right? They've got to look at who's dying, which is a really, you know, it's a very warped way of trying to go through it. So I would try and reframe it if I were you, Briege, and indeed for anyone else who's finding this a worry. And I personally just stopped looking at the curve after a while. You know, once a day I check in to see, okay, the death rate has gone down fine. But I actually remember that I know so many people who've had COVID-19 who haven't had to go to hospital at all. The vast majority of us won't even have to go to hospital if we catch COVID-19, and that's across the board. So it's reframing and being very careful about the information you allow in. I have a real bee in my bonnet about what journalists are being like at the moment, but that would form another webinar, which I'm very happy to have if we feel we want to vent about journalists and responsibility. But they're obviously latching on to the sensationalist stories. But it's within our power to reframe how we look at the data and what we choose to focus on. So I hope that helps a bit, Briege, around that.
I think it's trying to get a balanced perspective, and it's really hard when you're bombarded with information and not all of it correct either. It takes time and effort to sift through, and it takes time and effort for a human to actually process that information and come to a conclusion.
And that's why it's worth limiting how much time you spend looking at the information and in what form you're looking at it. So, you know, the first 4 weeks I was checking Twitter every hour, Facebook, LinkedIn, the Daily Mail, app on my phone. I'd log on and look at other things that were coming in. People were sending WhatsApp messages with videos and, you know, and I just thought there's too much here, actually. It's not helping. You know, some of it's not real information, a lot of it's fake news. All I need to do is check in once a day on a reliable source. I just chose one newspaper, look at the headlines. I actually do it in the beginning of the day, so it's not last thing at night, because the last thing I need is to be remembering all this at night. I do it first thing in the morning, then I exercise, get ready and start my working day, and that's it. I will not now look at Twitter. I delete a lot of the videos that people send me through WhatsApp. I've actually asked people to stop doing it. Because as you say, Briege, rightly, information overload has led to many, many issues for people. We're being bombarded all the time. And you need to be a lot more, we can be more responsible, frankly, about what we're allowing to take in. That's within our control. It is within our control what we decide to look at, listen to. You know, we can choose to turn on the telly or not. We can choose to, you know, log on or not, or check the websites or whatever. So I'd ask everyone to take back a bit more control around that, because it will really help your mental health, trust me.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You're
Any
welcome,
other
Briege.
questions?
I have one.
Go
that
for it,
Pearl
Ronke.
or Ron?
Ronke and Pearl. So we'll go for Ronks first and then Pearl.
Okay. Thanks, Funke. It's about HR strategy and thinking about our strategy for the next year. And it's really difficult to put a proper strategy in place because of what's going on. And it's, what do you think is important that we consider in terms of our strategy for the next year, or should I say for the next 9 months in terms of people and in terms of, you know, how we develop our people and how we support our people in this period of time, really.
So the first thing is morale, you know, because this whole period has thrown everything up in the air. Everyone's been impacted, destabilized, worried, has lost sleep. They may have lost a family member or a friend. You know, let's not forget that the impact this has had on everybody. And before we start talking about what we're actually going to be doing in terms of strategy, let's make sure that, you know, mindset, and that's why I started with self-care as the first thing. Are we actually in the right mindset before we start looking at what we're going to be doing going forward? Because as you'll know, Runke, as an HR manager yourself, if people aren't in the right mindset, you might be able to get them to do what you want them to do, but it's not the best way to do it. And engagement levels will really suffer as a result of that. So starting with, you know, where are we now in terms of our frame of mind? You know, you can do things like a temperature check. You can do where are you on a scale of 1 to 10. I mean, there are all sorts of ways you can do that in small groups or larger groups. I would start on that before you do anything else around what you want to achieve. Give people an opportunity to actually talk about how they're feeling. You know, people would have been bereaved as a result of all of this, Runke. You know, there would have been people who lost dear family members, plans have been shelved, you know, marriages and things that should have happened. You know, we're really dealing with a lot. And before we can start thinking about what we need to do for the business, let's actually address that mindset piece, get everyone to just share their collective experience of what this whole experience has been like for them. Almost like, what have I learned through this? You know, what has this experience shown me and taught me? How am I feeling now? Before we then begin to look, you know, at what we need to do. And we're very, very good at doing that, aren't we? I mean, we can identify in the business, okay, this is an area we need to plug a gap here. This person might be up for promotion. Okay, that's what they need to do. I would start with the mindset first. Don't overlook that, Runke. It's really key. It's been very traumatic for people. I can't hear you, Runke.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And I think it was Pearl next, wasn't it?
Yes, very much. Thank you for a really informative session.
You're welcome, Pearl.
Very, 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 very helpful, very good. I wanted to ask my question around something you said a little while earlier in response to someone else's query around vulnerability.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask that particularly because when we think workplace, I'm not calling anybody out in particular, but when we think it, very often we don't necessarily think vulnerability. And I'm just wondering, how do you balance that being vulnerable, giving people space? Because you sort of started answering it in your last answer a moment ago. But how do you even balance that against the desire almost of people to see a lead from the front and don't be afraid?
So the first thing, I want to make 2 points around it. The first thing is we've all been brought to our knees by this. So whatever ideas you had before about the leadership, and I know where you work, so I don't want to say too much, whatever impressions you might have had about certain leaders, or those in leadership prior to this, trust me, that will have changed as a result of all of this. There is no way they would have gone through all of this without having it impacted them in some way. So that's the first thing. Don't assume that you're going to go back and have the same kinds of behaviors or ways of being, if you like. The second thing is, this is why Myers-Briggs is so, so, so important. Because without self-awareness of yourself and indeed others, you're not actually empowered to know whether or not that person wants to talk about it. How would they like to communicate? You know, it's very difficult for me to go into detail without actually having gone through the Myers-Briggs process. And some of you have already done it. As Leslie mentioned, she's familiar with it. But, you know, it covers things like how you make decisions. Are you led essentially by the heart or the mind? Now, I'm a heart person, shall we say. So I'm very sort of emotionally driven. So if someone wants to get me on side, they can't be methodical about it. They can't be, this needs doing and that, you know. Some people respond very well to that. If they're all about their head and they just want a set of instructions, and there are people whose Myers-Briggs profile actually indicates that for, then that's the way you communicate with them. So without the awareness of how people are processing information, how they receive the information, it's actually really difficult to then know how to communicate with them. What do you want to hear? How do you want to hear it? So that's why the Myers-Briggs thing's very quick and easy to do. You don't even need, you know, someone like me to come in and run a workshop. You can do it on your own. It's more fun when it's done in a structured way, but it really helps you to understand yourself better and have a better appreciation of what other people can be like, actually, and think, gosh, me approaching them that way actually is not going to help at all. I need to just make sure that I give them a bit of space. Then I go to talk to them about X, Y, and Z. And this is how I need to package it. All of these things become crystal clear once you've done Myers-Briggs. Trust me, Pearl. So I'd suggest you have a go. You can do it for free online using one of the links that I had at the end of my slide deck. You get a report that covers all areas of your life. So you'll have a good laugh about some of the areas, made me chuckle about what I'm like as a mother and things like that, which my son agreed with. It's a really, really good tool, very, very important tool, actually. I think it's essential that we get a better understanding of each other as a result of this, because you can imagine the disasters that, you know, could follow if we're making assumptions about what we may or may not want to be hearing or doing. So I hope that gives you a bit of a way forward on that, Pearl, but it's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really helpful. It's a great reminder. It's a tool that I am not unfamiliar with, but have not thought about recently. So I really do like the idea of even refreshing that in context. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
Lovely. Anybody else? Please put your hand up. Okay. I think what I've taken from this is an opportunity, and it's like a rebirth. You know, it's a chance to reinvent yourself, a chance to have a really close look at yourself and your business and your people, to say, actually, we were doing this because we've always done it. Now's a chance to look at it and maybe do something differently, but not, as you said, reinventing the wheel. I found this absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
And we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending out the notes that Funke has put together for you, so that you'll get all of those details, so that you can follow up on all the links and take some of the advice and go on the journey. Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye, everyone.